Marcus had served the royal family for 15 years. He started as a young man with dreams of protecting the crown, and now at 38 he knew every corner of the palace grounds. His uniform was always perfect, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his loyalty had never been questioned. Until today, the morning began like any other. Marcus walked through the long corridors lined with ancient portraits of kings and queens. The marble floors echoed with his steady footsteps as he made his rounds. He checked every window, every door, and every entrance that led to the royal quarters. This was his responsibility, and he took it seriously. Queen Camilla had always been kind to him. She remembered his name, asked about his family, and even sent flowers when his mother passed away last year. Unlike some royals who barely noticed the staff, she made an effort to connect with the people who worked tirelessly to keep the palace running smoothly. That Tuesday morning, Marcus was assigned to escort a medical team to the private wing. It was routine work. The royal family often had doctors visit for regular checkups. He didn't think much of it as he led the 3 specialists through the security checkpoints and up the grand staircase to the Queen's private quarters. Dr. Helena Morrison was the lead physician. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. As they waited outside the Queen's sitting room, she struck up a conversation with Marcus about palace security. He answered her questions politely, explaining the various protocols they followed to keep the royal family safe. After the medical appointment, something unusual happened. Dr. Morrison dropped her briefcase near the elevator, and papers scattered across the marble floor. Marcus immediately knelt down to help her collect the documents. That's when he saw it, a laboratory report with the royal seal at the top. His eyes quickly scanned the page before handing it back to the doctor. The words he read made his blood run cold. DNA analysis. Paternity test. Results negative. The paper clearly stated that tests had been conducted on samples from Queen Camilla and members of the royal bloodline. The conclusion was shocking. There was no genetic connection between Camilla and the royal family she had married into. Marcus tried to push the information from his mind as he completed his duties that day. He told himself it was none of his business. Palace staff were trained to see nothing, hear nothing, and say nothing about private royal matters. But the knowledge burned inside him like a secret fire that wouldn't go out. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment near the palace grounds. The walls were decorated with photos from his years of service, pictures of him standing guard during state visits, royal weddings, and important ceremonies. He had dedicated his entire adult life to protecting the crown and everything it represented. He thought about his father, who had also served as a royal guard before retiring. His father had taught him that loyalty to the crown meant loyalty to the truth and the proper bloodline that gave the monarchy its legitimacy. The royal family isn't just people, son, his father had said. They represent something bigger than themselves. They carry the weight of history and tradition. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about what he had seen on that medical report. If the information was true, it meant that Queen Camilla was not actually connected to the royal bloodline through birth. This raised serious questions about her position and the legitimacy of her role in the monarchy. The next morning brought no relief. Marcus went through his duties mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere. During lunch break, he researched everything he could about royal succession laws and the importance of bloodline in maintaining the crown's authority. The more he read, the more convinced he became that this information was too important to keep secret. He thought about the British people who supported the monarchy, paying taxes to maintain the royal lifestyle, and looking up to the royal family as symbols of their nation's heritage. Did they have a right to know the truth about Queen Camilla's background? Marcus felt the weight of this knowledge pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy burden. By Thursday, Marcus had made his decision. He couldn't continue serving in the palace while keeping such a significant secret. He contacted a trusted journalist named Sarah Chen, someone who had written fair and balanced articles about the royal family in the past. Sarah was known for her integrity and her careful approach to sensitive stories. They met at a small cafe far from the palace, in a quiet neighborhood where Marcus was unlikely to be recognized. Sarah listened carefully as Marcus explained what he had seen on the medical report. She asked detailed questions about the document, the circumstances of how he had seen it, and his certainty about what it contained. This is an enormous accusation, Sarah said quietly, stirring her coffee while looking around to make sure no one was listening. If this information is accurate, it would shake the very foundation of the monarchy. Are you absolutely certain about what you saw? Marcus nodded grimly. I've served the royal family faithfully for 15 years. I would never make something like this up. The document was official, with all the proper seals and signatures. The DNA results were clear. Sarah explained that she would need to verify the information through multiple sources before publishing anything. She couldn't simply take Marcus's word no matter how trustworthy he seemed. The story would require careful investigation and confirmation from medical professionals who could speak to the validity of such tests. As Marcus walked back to the palace that evening, he knew there was no turning back. He had set something in motion that would change everything. The peaceful life he had known for 15 years was about to end, and he wasn't sure what would replace it. All he knew was that he had done what his conscience demanded, even though it might cost him everything he had worked for. Sarah Chen spent the weekend researching everything she could find about royal DNA testing and the legal implications of what Marcus had told her. She contacted 3 genetic specialists who agreed to speak with her confidentially about the possibility of such tests being conducted on royal family members. Dr. James Fletcher, a respected geneticist from Cambridge University, explained that DNA testing of royal family members would be extremely sensitive and likely conducted in complete secrecy. Such tests would only be ordered if there were serious questions about lineage or succession rights, he told Sarah over a secure phone line. The results would be handled by a very small group of people with the highest security clearances. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his daily duties at the palace, but everything felt different now. Every conversation with Queen Camilla made him uncomfortable. When she smiled at him in the hallway or asked about his weekend plans, he struggled to respond naturally. The secret knowledge he carried made every interaction feel like a lie. On Monday morning, Marcus noticed increased activity in the administrative wing of the palace. Important-looking officials in dark suits were meeting behind closed doors, and there was an unusual tension in the air. Palace staff whispered among themselves about special security briefings and emergency protocols being reviewed. Marcus wondered if his meeting with Sarah had somehow been discovered. He became paranoid about his phone calls and emails, checking over his shoulder whenever he walked through the palace corridors. The weight of what he had done was beginning to affect his sleep and his appetite. That afternoon, Sarah called him with disturbing news. "I've been trying to contact Dr. Helena Morrison, the physician you mentioned," she said. "Her office says she's unavailable and won't be taking interviews. I also reached out to the medical facility that would have processed the lab work, but they claim no knowledge of any royal DNA testing." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "They're covering it up," he said quietly. "The palace must know that I saw the report." Sarah agreed that it seemed like damage control was already underway. "We need more evidence," she told him. "Without additional confirmation, this story won't hold up. The palace has resources to discredit both of us if we move forward without solid proof." The next morning brought Marcus's worst fears to life. Captain Reynolds, the head of palace security, called Marcus into his office. Captain Reynolds was a stern man with gray hair and cold eyes, who had served in the military before joining the Royal Guard. Marcus had always respected him, but now he felt like a criminal walking into an interrogation room. "Marcus, we need to talk," Captain Reynolds said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "There have been some concerns raised about your recent activities." Marcus tried to remain calm, but his heart was pounding. "What kind of concerns, sir?" "You were seen meeting with a journalist at a cafe in Westminster. You've also been making unusual phone calls and asking questions about medical procedures involving the royal family." Captain Reynolds leaned forward. "These behaviors are inconsistent with your oath of loyalty and confidentiality." Marcus realized that the palace had been watching him more closely than he had imagined. "I haven't violated any protocols, sir. Palace staff are allowed to have personal conversations and friendships outside of work. Not when those conversations involve sharing confidential information about the royal family," Captain Reynolds replied coldly. "We know about Sarah Chen. We know what you think you saw last week. And we know that you've been spreading false and damaging allegations." The word false hit Marcus like a physical blow. "The document I saw was real, sir. The DNA test results were clear. Captain Reynolds stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. Marcus, you've served this family faithfully for 15 years. Your record has been exemplary. That's why I'm going to give you an opportunity to correct this situation before it destroys your career and your reputation. He turned back to face Marcus with a serious expression. The document you believe you saw was part of a security test. We periodically create false documents with sensitive information to test the loyalty and discretion of our staff. The medical report you saw was completely fabricated. Marcus stared at Captain Reynolds in disbelief. A security test? Exactly. Dr. Morrison was instructed to drop her briefcase containing the fake documents to see how you would react. Unfortunately, you failed the test by sharing the information with an outside party. Captain Reynolds returned to his desk. However, because of your long service record, we're prepared to offer you a choice. Marcus felt confused and betrayed. Was it possible that everything he had seen was just an elaborate test? The document had looked completely authentic, with official seals and signatures that seemed genuine. What kind of choice? Marcus asked quietly. You can resign quietly with a full pension and a positive letter of recommendation. We'll also ensure that the false story you shared with the journalist never sees publication. In exchange, you sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and agree never to speak about this incident again. Marcus felt trapped. If he refused the offer, Captain Reynolds was clearly implying that worse consequences would follow. His career would be over, his reputation destroyed, and he might even face legal action for violating his oath of confidentiality. What's the alternative? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Immediate termination without benefits, possible criminal charges for violating the Official Secrets Act, and a very public investigation into your conduct that would make it impossible for you to find employment anywhere in government or security work. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Marcus thought about his small apartment, his aging mother who depended on his support, and the 15 years of his life he had invested in royal service. Everything he had worked for was being threatened because he had tried to do what he thought was right. I need time to think about this, Marcus said finally. Captain Reynolds nodded. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. But Marcus, let me be very clear. This offer won't be available indefinitely. The palace values loyalty above all else, and right now your loyalty is in serious question. As Marcus left the security office, his mind was reeling. Was it possible that he had been wrong about everything? Could the DNA report really have been fake? The doubt began to eat away at his certainty, making him question his own judgment and memory. Marcus spent a sleepless night pacing around his small apartment, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The official explanation about a security test felt wrong, but he couldn't shake the doubt that Captain Reynolds had planted in his mind. He kept replaying the moment when he saw the DNA report, trying to remember every detail of the document. The paper had felt authentic in his hands. The royal seal had looked genuine, with the proper colors and raised lettering that would be difficult to fake. The medical terminology and laboratory formatting had appeared professional and legitimate. But now he wondered if his memory was playing tricks on him, or if the palace security team was more sophisticated than he had imagined. Early the next morning, before he had to give Captain Reynolds his decision, Marcus called Sarah Chen. He needed to know if she had made any progress in her investigation, or if she had discovered anything that might confirm or deny the palace's claim about a security test. I was just about to call you, Sarah said when she heard his voice. I've been digging deeper into this story and I found something interesting. I spoke with a former palace employee who worked in the medical wing 5 years ago. She told me that DNA testing of royal family members is more common than the public realizes. Marcus felt a spark of hope. What kind of testing? Routine genetic screening for hereditary diseases, paternity confirmation for succession purposes, and occasionally investigation into family lineage when questions arise. She said the results are always handled by a very small team and kept in the most secure files in the palace. This information conflicted with Captain Reynolds' explanation about a security test. If DNA testing was routine, then the document Marcus had seen might have been genuine after all. Did she say anything about fake documents being used to test staff loyalty? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Actually, she laughed when I mentioned that possibility. She said the palace would never risk creating false documents about something as sensitive as royal DNA testing. The legal and security implications would be too dangerous. Marcus felt his certainty returning. The palace was lying to him, trying to silence him with threats and false explanations. But he also realized that his position was becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. "Sarah, I think we need to move quickly. The palace knows about our conversation and they're putting pressure on me to stay quiet. If we're going to publish this story, it has to be soon." "I understand, but I still need more evidence," Sarah replied. "The story is too important to publish without solid confirmation. Give me 2 more days to verify the information through additional sources." Marcus agreed, but he knew he might not have 2 days. He had to report to Captain Reynolds in 1 hour with his decision about accepting the resignation offer. If he refused, the consequences would be immediate and severe. At 9 o'clock sharp, Marcus knocked on Captain Reynolds's door. The security chief looked up from his paperwork with an expression that suggested he already knew what Marcus's answer would be. "Well?" Captain Reynolds asked simply. "I need more time to consider the offer," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Captain Reynolds frowned. "That wasn't one of the options I gave you yesterday." "I'm not convinced that the document I saw was fake," Marcus said, deciding to be direct. "If you want me to sign a non-disclosure agreement and resign quietly, I need proof that this was really just a security test." The security chief's expression hardened. "Marcus, you're making a serious mistake. The palace has been more than generous in offering you a graceful exit from this situation. Don't force us to pursue less pleasant alternatives." "What kind of alternatives?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. Before Captain Reynolds could respond, there was a knock on the door. A young assistant entered and whispered something in the captain's ear. Captain Reynolds' face went pale and he dismissed the assistant with a sharp nod. "It seems your journalist friend has been busy," Captain Reynolds said grimly. "We've just learned that Sarah Chen has contacted several other media outlets about this story. She's also been trying to reach current and former palace staff for interviews." Marcus felt both proud and terrified. Sarah was taking the story seriously and doing her job as a journalist, but her investigation was also escalating the situation beyond what either of them had anticipated. "This changes things significantly," Captain Reynolds continued. "The palace can no longer offer you a quiet resignation. Your actions have created a potential media crisis that requires immediate damage control." Marcus realized that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. You'll surrender your security credentials, your palace access card, and your communication devices. You're also forbidden from leaving London without permission from the palace legal team." The punishment was swift and thorough. Within 30 minutes, Marcus found himself escorted out of the palace by 2 security guards. His 15 years of faithful service ended with a humiliating walk-through, the same corridors where he had once been respected and trusted. As he stood outside the palace gates for the first time as a former employee, Marcus felt both liberated and terrified. He no longer had to pretend that everything was normal, but he also had no idea what would happen next. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Chen asking to meet urgently. They arranged to meet at a different cafe, this time in a busy shopping district where they could blend in with the crowds. When Sarah arrived, her expression was serious but determined. "The palace is moving fast to contain this story," she said without preamble. "I've received calls from 3 different lawyers representing the royal family, all threatening legal action if I publish anything about DNA testing or Queen Camilla's lineage." Marcus wasn't surprised. "They fired me this morning and suspended my security clearance. They also said I can't leave London." Sarah nodded grimly. "They're trying to isolate us and cut off our resources. But I have some good news. I've been in contact with a former laboratory technician who claims to have processed genetic samples from royal family members. She's agreed to speak with me, but only if I can guarantee her anonymity." This was the break they needed. But Marcus also understood that accepting the technician's information would make him a permanent enemy of the palace. Once Sarah published the story, there would be no going back to his old life. "Are you sure you want to continue with this?" Sarah asked, studying his face carefully. "Once we publish, you'll be at the center of one of the biggest royal scandals in modern history. The palace will use every resource they have to discredit you and destroy your reputation." Marcus thought about his 15 years of service. his modest pension that was now gone, and the uncertain future that stretched ahead of him. Then he thought about the truth and about the British people who deserved to know what their tax money was supporting. "Let's do it," he said quietly. "The truth is more important than my comfort." The laboratory technician agreed to meet Sarah at a secure location outside London. Her name was Dr. Emma Walsh, and she had worked at the private medical facility that handled sensitive genetic testing for government agencies and high-profile clients. She had left her position 6 months earlier, after becoming uncomfortable with some of the confidential work she was required to perform. Sarah traveled alone to the meeting, leaving Marcus in London to avoid drawing attention. Dr. Walsh was a nervous woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and worried eyes. She chain-smoked cigarettes as she spoke, constantly looking around the empty parking garage where they had arranged to meet. "I shouldn't be talking to you," Dr. Walsh said immediately. "I signed confidentiality agreements that could land me in prison if anyone finds out about this conversation." Sarah assured her that her identity would be protected, but Dr. Walsh remained anxious throughout their discussion. She confirmed that her laboratory had processed multiple DNA samples from members of the royal family over the past several years, including samples from Queen Camilla. The testing was always ordered through official channels with the highest security classifications, Dr. Walsh explained. "We were told that the results were for medical purposes, but some of the tests were clearly paternity and lineage verification." Sarah asked specifically about Queen Camilla's DNA results. Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment before answering. The Queen's genetic profile showed no markers consistent with the established royal bloodline. When I processed those results, I was shocked. I had to run the tests 3 times to make sure there hadn't been a mistake. This was the confirmation Sarah needed, but Dr. Walsh had more disturbing information to share. She explained that after processing Queen Camilla's DNA results, she had been approached by palace security officials who demanded that all records be destroyed, and that she sign additional confidentiality agreements. They made it very clear that discussing these results with anyone would result in serious legal consequences, Dr. Walsh said. "I was also told that my family's safety could be at risk if I ever spoke about what I had discovered." Sarah realized that the palace's reaction to Marcus's discovery was part of a larger pattern of concealment and intimidation. The royal family had known about Queen Camilla's genetic status for some time and had been actively working to keep that information secret. Meanwhile, back in London, Marcus was dealing with his own problems. His phone rang constantly with calls from unknown numbers, and strange cars began parking outside his apartment building. He suspected that the palace was having him watched, but he couldn't prove it. On Thursday morning, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Queen Camilla herself arrived at his apartment building in an unmarked car with minimal security. She asked to speak with him privately, and despite his anger and distrust, Marcus agreed to meet with her. They sat in his small living room, surrounded by the modest furniture and family photos that represented his simple life. Queen Camilla looked older and more tired than he remembered, and there was a sadness in her eyes that seemed genuine. "Marcus, I know you think you're doing the right thing," she began quietly. "But there are things about this situation that you don't understand." Marcus remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "The DNA tests you saw were accurate," she admitted, confirming what he had suspected all along. "I am not genetically related to the royal family by blood." The confession hit Marcus like a physical blow, even though he had been expecting it. Hearing the truth directly from Queen Camilla made it real in a way that laboratory reports and secret meetings never could. "But that doesn't mean I don't belong in this family," she continued. "I married into the royal line legally and legitimately. My role as queen doesn't depend on my genetic heritage." Marcus found his voice. "The British people have a right to know the truth about their royal family. They pay taxes to support the monarchy based on the belief that you represent a legitimate continuation of their historical heritage." Queen Camilla nodded sadly. "I understand your perspective, but you must also understand the consequences of this information becoming public. It would destroy the monarchy's credibility and potentially end 1,000 years of tradition." She leaned forward, her voice becoming more urgent. "Marcus, I'm asking you personally to reconsider your decision to expose this information. Not for my sake, but for the sake of the institution that you've served faithfully for 15 years. Marcus felt torn between his loyalty to the Queen as a person and his commitment to the truth. She had always been kind to him, and he could see the genuine pain in her eyes. But he also thought about the millions of British citizens who believed they were supporting a legitimate royal bloodline. Your Majesty, with respect, this decision isn't just about you or me. It's about honesty and transparency in institutions that the public trusts and supports financially. Queen Camilla was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing her options. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, what if I told you that my genetic heritage isn't the only secret the royal family has been keeping? What if this DNA testing revealed other information that could be even more damaging to the monarchy? Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of information? Information about other family members. Information about succession rights and legitimacy that goes back generations. The DNA testing wasn't just about me. It was part of a comprehensive review of the entire royal bloodline. The implications of what she was suggesting were staggering. If there were questions about the genetic legitimacy of multiple royal family members, it would mean that the entire modern monarchy could be built on uncertain foundations. Are you saying that other members of the royal family aren't genetically legitimate either? Marcus asked. Queen Camilla looked directly into his eyes. I'm saying that modern genetic testing has revealed complexities about royal lineage that were never anticipated when these bloodline traditions were established. The truth is more complicated than simple DNA matches. Marcus realized that the situation was far more complex than he had originally understood. What had started as a discovery about Queen Camilla's genetic heritage was apparently part of a much larger issue involving the fundamental legitimacy of the entire royal family. Your Majesty, are you asking me to keep quiet about all of this information? Or are you suggesting that the public deserves to know the full truth about the royal family's genetic heritage? Queen Camilla stood up and walked to the window overlooking the street. I'm asking you to consider whether destroying the monarchy serves any useful purpose for the British people. The institution provides stability, tradition, and national identity that goes beyond genetic bloodlines. Marcus understood her argument, but he also felt the weight of his responsibility to the truth. The conversation with Queen Camilla had given him more information than he had bargained for, and now he faced an even more difficult decision about how to proceed. After Queen Camilla left his apartment, Marcus sat in stunned silence for hours. The weight of what she had revealed pressed down on him like a crushing burden. The story had grown far beyond a simple DNA test result, into something that could potentially destroy the entire British monarchy. He tried calling Sarah, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He left a message asking her to contact him urgently, but he wasn't sure how much he should tell her about Queen Camilla's visit. The Queen hadn't specifically asked him to keep their conversation secret, but the implications of what she had shared were enormous. That evening, Sarah finally called him back. Her voice sounded strained and worried. Marcus, we have a problem, she said without any greeting. My editor has been contacted by palace lawyers with a court injunction preventing us from publishing anything related to royal DNA testing. They're claiming national security concerns and potential threats to public order. Marcus felt his heart sink. Can they really stop the story from being published? They're certainly trying. The injunction is temporary, but it gives them time to build a more comprehensive legal case. My newspaper's lawyers are reviewing the situation, but they're worried about the potential consequences of defying a royal court order. This was exactly what Queen Camilla had warned him about. The palace had legal and political resources that ordinary people couldn't match. They could tie up the story in courts for months or years, and even if the truth eventually came out, it might be too late to matter. Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you, Marcus said. Queen Camilla came to see me today. There was silence on the other end of the phone. She what? Marcus explained the entire conversation, including Queen Camilla's admission about the DNA test results and her hints about other royal family members having similar genetic questions. Sarah listened without interrupting, but he could hear her taking notes. This is incredible, Sarah said when he finished. She basically confirmed everything we suspected, but she also suggested that the problem is much bigger than we realized. That's what worries me, Marcus replied. If other royal family members are involved, then publishing this story could bring down the entire monarchy. I'm not sure I'm prepared for that level of responsibility. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Marcus, I understand your concerns, but we're journalists, not political decision makers. Our job is to report the truth and let the public decide how to respond to it. But even as she said it, Sarah knew the situation wasn't that simple. The potential consequences of their story were so significant that they had to consider the broader impact on British society and the constitutional system. The next morning brought unexpected news. Dr. Emma Walsh, the laboratory technician who had confirmed Queen Camilla's DNA results, had been arrested on charges of violating the Official Secrets Act. According to news reports, she was being held without bail pending a full investigation into unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Marcus realized that the palace was sending a clear message to anyone who might be considering cooperating with journalists or sharing information about royal DNA testing. Dr. Walsh's arrest was meant to intimidate other potential sources and demonstrate the serious consequences of challenging the royal family's privacy. They're trying to scare everyone into silence, Sarah said when they spoke that afternoon. But Dr. Walsh's arrest actually supports our story. Why would they arrest her if the DNA testing was fake or unimportant? Marcus agreed, but he was also deeply concerned about Dr. Walsh's safety and well-being. She had risked her freedom to help confirm the truth, and now she was paying the price for her courage. That evening, Marcus received another unexpected visitor. This time it was Captain Reynolds, accompanied by 2 palace lawyers and a representative from the government's security services. They presented him with official documents requiring his cooperation in their investigation. Marcus, you're going to answer some questions about your unauthorized communications with journalists and your violations of your oath of confidentiality, Captain Reynolds said formally. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. They asked him about every detail of his discovery of the DNA report, his meetings with Sarah Chen, and his conversation with Queen Camilla. Marcus answered their questions honestly, but he refused to provide information that might compromise Sarah's other sources or her investigation methods. Your cooperation in this matter will be noted when we determine what charges to file against you, one of the lawyers told him as they prepared to leave. Marcus understood the implicit threat. If he continued to cooperate with Sarah's investigation, he would face criminal charges similar to those filed against Dr. Walsh. But if he agreed to stop talking to journalists and sign additional confidentiality agreements, he might avoid prosecution. After the officials left, Marcus called his own lawyer, a public defender who specialized in government employee rights. The lawyer explained that Marcus's situation was extremely serious and that the palace had strong legal grounds for pursuing criminal charges against him. They can argue that you violated the Official Secrets Act, breached your oath of confidentiality, and potentially threatened national security, the lawyer explained. Even if you ultimately win in court, the legal process could take years and cost more money than you have. Marcus realized that he was trapped between his commitment to the truth and the practical realities of challenging one of the most powerful institutions in Britain. The palace had unlimited resources to pursue legal action against him, while he was just an ordinary person with limited means to defend himself. That night, Sarah called with more bad news. The court injunction has been extended indefinitely, she said. My newspaper has decided not to fight it. The legal costs and potential consequences are too high for them to risk. Marcus felt defeated. All of their work to expose the truth was being buried under legal threats and intimidation. So that's it? The story just disappears? Not necessarily, Sarah replied. I'm considering taking this to an international news organization that's outside British legal jurisdiction. The story is too important to let the palace suppress it completely. But even as she said it, Sarah knew that international publication would create its own problems. Foreign news organizations might not have the same standards for verification, and the story could be dismissed as sensationalized gossip rather than serious journalism. Marcus lay awake that night, thinking about everything that had happened since he first saw that DNA report. His life had been completely disrupted, his career was over, and he faced the possibility of criminal prosecution. Meanwhile, the truth he had tried to expose remained hidden from the British people who had a right to know it. He thought about Queen Camilla's visit and her appeal for him to consider the broader consequences of his actions. She had made valid points about the importance of stability and tradition, But he also believed that democracy required transparency and honesty from public institutions. The next morning would bring another crucial decision point in his journey toward either vindication or destruction. 3 weeks after his last conversation with the palace officials, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. It was Dr. Emma Walsh calling from a secure phone outside the country. "Marcus, I managed to get bail and leave Britain before they could stop me," she said in a rushed voice. "I'm in Ireland now, and I have something important to tell you." Marcus was shocked to hear from her. "Dr. Walsh, are you safe?" "I thought they were holding you without bail. My lawyer found a procedural error in the charges and I was released temporarily. But I knew they would arrest me again within days, so I left the country immediately." Her voice was shaky but determined. "Marcus, there's more to this story than even I told your journalist friend." Dr. Walsh explained that during her years at the laboratory, she had processed DNA samples from multiple royal family members as part of what she was told was routine medical screening. But the patterns she discovered suggested that questions about royal lineage went back much further than anyone had realized. The genetic testing revealed that at least 3 generations of the royal family show inconsistencies with the established bloodline, she said. Queen Camilla's results were just the most recent example of a much larger pattern. Marcus felt his world shift again. If Dr. Walsh was correct, then the entire modern monarchy was built on uncertain genetic foundations. The implications were staggering not just for Queen Camilla, but for the legitimacy of the crown itself. "Dr. Walsh, are you saying that multiple members of the royal family aren't genetically related to the historical bloodline?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. The DNA evidence suggests that the royal lineage has been compromised for decades, possibly longer. The palace has known about this for years, but they've been conducting damage control rather than addressing the fundamental questions it raises." Dr. Walsh had more shocking news. She had kept copies of some of the test results before leaving her position, and she was prepared to share them with international journalists who could publish the story without fear of British legal intervention. "I've already contacted reporters in 3 different countries," she said. "The story is going to come out whether the British palace likes it or not." Marcus realized that the situation was about to explode far beyond anything he had imagined when he first saw that DNA report. The story was no longer just about Queen Camilla, or even about the current royal family. It was about the entire historical basis of the British monarchy. That afternoon, Sarah Chen called with urgent news. "Marcus, something big is happening. I just got calls from journalists in France, Germany, and the United States. They all say they've received information about widespread genetic inconsistencies in the British royal family. Dr. Walsh contacted me this morning," Marcus explained. "She's out of the country and she's sharing her information with international media." Sarah was excited but also worried. "This is going to be enormous, but it's also going to be dangerous for everyone involved. The palace won't be able to use British courts to stop international publications, but they'll find other ways to retaliate." The next morning, the story broke simultaneously in newspapers and online publications in 6 different countries. The headlines were devastating. DNA evidence questions century of royal legitimacy, and British monarchy built on genetic lies. Lab results show the international coverage was detailed and damning. Dr. Walsh had provided genetic analysis results showing that multiple generations of the royal family lacked the genetic markers that would confirm their descent from the historical royal bloodline. The evidence suggested that the current monarchy was essentially a carefully maintained fiction. Within hours of the international publication, the British media was forced to cover the story despite the court injunctions. The information was already public worldwide, and British news organizations couldn't ignore such a significant story about their own royal family. Marcus watched the coverage from his apartment, feeling both vindicated and terrified. His phone rang constantly with calls from journalists around the world, wanting to interview the royal guard who had discovered the truth. But he also knew that the palace would blame him for the international embarrassment. By midday, protests had begun outside Buckingham Palace. Some demonstrators demanded the abolition of the monarchy, while others called for transparency and honesty from the royal family. The political implications were immediate and severe, with members of parliament calling for emergency sessions to discuss the constitutional crisis. Queen Camilla appeared on television that evening to address the nation. She looked exhausted and deeply saddened as she spoke, directly to the British people. The recent revelations about royal genetic testing have raised serious questions about the monarchy's legitimacy, she said quietly. I want to speak to you honestly about these issues and what they mean for our country. She confirmed that the DNA test results were accurate and that questions about royal lineage were more complex than the public had been told, but she also made an emotional appeal for understanding and continuity. The monarchy has never been just about genetic bloodlines, she said. It represents continuity, tradition, and service to the British people. These values don't depend on DNA test results. Despite her dignified response, the damage to the monarchy's credibility was severe. Opinion polls showed that support for the royal family had dropped dramatically overnight, and there were calls from across the political spectrum for a complete review of the constitutional role of the monarchy. Marcus found himself at the center of one of the biggest political storms in modern British history. Some people praised him as a hero who had exposed an important truth, while others blamed him for destroying a beloved national institution. A week after the story broke, Marcus received one final visitor. It was Queen Camilla again, but this time she looked different. She seemed smaller somehow and much older than her years. Marcus, I wanted to thank you, she said quietly. Marcus was surprised. Thank me? For forcing us to confront the truth. I've spent years knowing about these genetic questions and wondering when they would become public. In some ways, it's a relief that the secret is finally out. She sat down across from him, just as she had weeks earlier when she had asked him to keep quiet about his discovery. I also wanted to apologize for the way the palace treated you. You were doing what you thought was right, and you deserved better than threats and intimidation. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. His actions had changed history, but they had also caused pain to people he had once served and respected. What happens now? He asked. Queen Camilla smiled sadly. Now we find out whether the British people value truth more than tradition, and whether the monarchy can survive in a world where genetic testing reveals uncomfortable facts about royal lineage. The future of the monarchy remained uncertain, but Marcus knew that he had played a crucial role in forcing a conversation that Britain needed to have about truth, tradition, and the foundations of their constitutional system. As Queen Camilla prepared to leave, she turned back to him one final time. Marcus, regardless of what happens to the monarchy, you should know that you've served your country well. Sometimes the greatest service requires the greatest courage. Marcus watched her leave, knowing that both of their lives had been forever changed by a moment of truth that neither of them could have anticipated when his service to the crown began 15 years earlier.